Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tabletop. Today, you've been doing that for 2 years, and I still don't like. I'm like, it's not going to happen this time. But we're here, Franco and I. Nick, your host, are here to talk about an issue, not really an issue, a thing that I've been thinking about a lot. And Franco's actually doing the thing I wanted to talk about right now. So it was a great kismet of circumstances. I want to talk about the difference between a setting and a story, and building both of them for your table. So, for example,
that's why you brought me here today.
That's why I brought you here, because I don't care about you. I just care about your settings.
I didn't mean it that way.
One of the things that kind of got me thinking about this is that I watched this YouTube channel about 40K lore, and they were having a retrospective around what is the purpose of creating stories within a setting that is designed to sell miniature models. The setting of 40K, for those who don't know, is sort of like 30 years old at this point, and at the first 20 of those years, they actually never.
That's older than you are.
It is older than I am. It literally was designed in order to never progress, so that people could set their games of 40K anywhere they wanted in the galaxy within like a 2,000 year time period. So they would release different stories that were kind of all leading up to the turn of the 41st millennium, and you could kind of play games whenever you wanted in that time period. And they would constantly be putting out like books that had stories that would introduce certain worlds and systems and campaigns and different things that were happening throughout the galaxy that you could then play with your friends via gaming supplements. But it really got me thinking about the difference between when we are making a ttrpg or like creating a game for our friends to play, the difference between creating a setting and creating a story. Franco, as everyone else knows, you believe that story happens at the table, and that writing a story isn't so much a big part of things. However, you do create settings, and that is the way that you kind of prepare for these games. You create a big setting, and then you let your characters run around in it. And so I kind of want to talk through like, what is the purpose when you're creating a setting of making certain types of choices, what that does or allows you to do with your players, and all the things that come around that. So Franco, why don't you tell us a little bit about the setting you're creating? Because we were talking about it last night, and it got me sort of thinking about this a lot. So why don't we start there?
So I started making this setting kind of recently because I wanted to run an open table campaign, which I had tried to do when I was living in Salem. That didn't really pan out. And so I was like, let me give this another shot. Let me make this a little bit easier to make. For people who don't know, an open table campaign, also known as a West Marches campaign, is typically there's like a setting. It's usually like a sandbox setting. And it's sort of designed for people to drop in and out. And that the story that is sort of the emergent story that comes from play is sort of revolves around, like what is going on in the world, how the different characters interact with it, how the different characters like impact it. And not so much about like the individual characters or their individual story arcs. Those are obviously acceptable. Like you can have that, but it's not like about that. It's more about like, creating like experiencing how this world will change and evolve, and based on character actions and based on NPC actions, which obviously are, usually dictated by the GM, but I can get into that a little bit more too, like on the specifics of that. And I feel like I got away from what I was saying, or from the question. It was about I've got it. Hold on. So that's what an open table campaign is, and so that's what I've been working on for the past couple weeks. And the sort of the setting itself is I wanted to make a mega dungeon, because when I was so the original open table campaign that I was starting, it was a bit I think it was, apart from like sort of like the availability and the scheduling of people, I think the main issue that I think I was coming up against was like I made it too big from the outset. because I had sort of like, I wanted to play in Dolmenwood, which is a setting created by Gavin Norman, through Necrotic Gnome. It's really cool. I bought I backed it on Kickstarter. I have the books and stuff. It's a great setting. It's really very cool. It's sort of like a fairy tale woods type of setting. And I was also really interested in Nightwig Abbey, which is a mega dungeon by Miranda Elkins, put out through her Patreon, which I recommend checking out. But it's this sort of like hellish kind of, I would say like Diablo, almost like explicitly Diablo, like in certain places, in a very fun way, inspired mega dungeon. It's really big. I remember when Nick, when you were in it, one of the sort of like quests, like I gave everybody kind of like their own like personal like thing to do, and or it might have been that, or it might have been like just generally like this was out in the world that like 1,000 gold or something would be paid to anybody who could map a level of Nightwig Abbey. And I think I kind of let it slip like, okay, that was room 70. And you kind of
we
were
had
like,
been through 5 rooms.
Yeah. You're like, oh, what the fuck?
Oh no.
So I don't know. So anyway, really big. And I think like, I personally sometimes I've learned when I was like kind of setting this up, I've learned that I have a hard time playing in settings like or like running settings that have already been pre-written. And so I think that's why I was like, with this new open table campaign that I want to set up, I wanted to do something that was like more original, and then I could also like draw directly from things. So I have an Abbey, and it's like inspired by Nightwig Abbey, but it's not like all this stuff. I think I'm taking a monster directly from it though. I probably will a couple of others, but it's much like less complicated than that dungeon. It's just one part of the mega dungeon that I'm building as well. And so yeah, it's sort of like this really big sprawling mega dungeon. And then like an overworld as well that I hope will feed into that. And then the other thing I kind of set up were world anchors, which is this concept that I think Luca Redick, who wrote Ultraviolet Grasslands. I think, Am I making this up? Hold on a second. No, that's not what it was. Oh. It was from, I think it was a blog post from Mindstorm, who was talking about Ultraviolet Grasslands and the concept of the anti-canon. So like these things that are like sort of like going against the concept of canonical stuff in a story. And like in Ultraviolet Grasslands, there are these guys called the Porcelain Princes. Is that right? I don't know. These guys who are kind of like immortal. And then there's like a D10 table of like different facts about them. And a lot of them are contradictory. And so it's like this idea of like, creating your own thing, or like there being rumors, or there being like not a thing that is like canonically true. And I think that can be, it can be kind of interesting. And so like world anchors are sort of like grounding that concept. And so I made a list of those sort of like truths about the setting that people could interact with. Like I have it on a random thing. And so like those are going to be sort of like, if you're traveling. And then one of the anchors that I made was like about tea. So if you go over to somebody's place and you're offered tea, it is considered rude to decline it.
I really like what you're talking about there, though. I think Westmarch campaigns is like the perfect way to frame this conversation too, because it kind of is what they were talking about with the 40K example, is like what the studio is designing for that. In that case is like a bunch of people being able to have their own little storylines all over the galaxy, and none of them are not canon. You know what I mean? Yeah. So this like non-canon event that you're talking about is like very like along that line. I think that it's really interesting too, because the Westmarch's campaign style also really feeds into it, because you have a central hub, which is usually like a guild or a mercenary group or whoever all of these parties are going out from, that can be a hub of unreliable information. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like whatever party goes out to the red marshes and finds like a weird mermaid that is causing all of the neighboring villages to be lost at sea. Maybe the information that comes back as that kind of situation is evolving is considered sort of unreliable or not complete or not full, so that you can always have other groups at the table going and investigating and being part of that story without ever closing it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's like also this idea in sort of the original D&D as well, where like just like restocking dungeons and restocking areas. And so like if you resolve something here, you've left a power vacuum, and now the bandits move in, and now these people move in or something like that. And I think that can like keep your world sort of continual. It's a perpetual stew of NPCs coming in and out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, because the idea that with setting, what you were doing is setting up a scenario that is never going to be completely fixed. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's not a linear, the hero's journey doesn't really happen in real life in a way that it ends and then the world goes black afterwards. Yeah.
I think a lot of people resist that idea, and I think that's totally fine. Like everybody's fun is valid. I think for me, it's like I've been more drawn to this style of play just because, like the game that I ran in Salem, like the 5e campaign that I ran in Salem was like very much it wasn't like a West Marshes campaign, but it was like a sandbox.
Right.
And there were like big things that were happening in the world in the background. And so any one of those things could have like popped off, and been like, this is the big bad that you would, in a linear 5e story, like a traditional, like a trad modern style 5e campaign might like all be leading to this one epic battle. That could be anything. And I think it's like sometimes more like enemies that you meet along the way are more valuable and more satisfying to defeat, that when they come about like sort of organically, like for whatever reason, your players might not latch on to some enemy that you've made that you designated to be like the biggest, baddest motherfucker around. And I think like say like in the Argot campaign, which was also a 5e campaign that I ran, which was like a little bit sandboxy, I think I don't know if this is true or not, but to me it felt this way. But like defeating the sort of quest giver guy that betrayed you guys at the beginning was probably more satisfying to finally destroy him than it was to beat like the sort of designated really big bad guy.
Right.
That because it was just like, oh well, it's more personal or something, and it's easier for it to be more personal when it's like just something that you kind of come across rather than like something that is sort of like, well, this is the bad guy, so we're
right.
And I think that sort of leads to like, the sort of like story versus setting thing. Like if the setting is evolving, the stakes are changing and evolving too. Like the enemies get stronger, the players get stronger, or some of them die off, or some of them get reintroduced, and like alliances shift and stuff like that. And then that can just be very different to having a sort of linear or static style form of play. But again, it's just my preference, obviously, but I think like in this style of play, it also allows more room for risk, because in that heroic, like the super heroic style of play, like you don't ever really want your characters to die, because then it's like they could just be killed by a goblin or something, or
right.
They don't check for traps or something like that and they blow up. And so like that's not fun. And I think it's true that it's not fun. It can be. I think like there's like a different. I think it's like a culture thing, and I think it's like you establish the promise at the beginning of the game, and I think a lot of tables come in with like an assumption, and I think that's why session zeros are very important, obviously. But I think a lot of people don't consider sort of like the cultural assumptions that people have about play when it comes to D&D. In session zeros, like in session zeros, it's usually about like, oh, what kind of like game do you want to play? This like a dark game, a light game, this type of game, versus like, I'm only thinking about this because I found this list recently, but it's like a list of questions, and I think a couple of them are sort of related to like, what is the purpose of the game? It's like, is it to win or is it to have fun?
This is also something. Yeah. I'm sorry for interrupting, but this is something that I think that kind of goes back to the greater question too of story versus setting, because like one thing that I have sort of been feeling too is like how detailed or how big do you actually want to develop your setting when your players only play in a very specific part of it, if you play in that heroic style that you're talking about, where you're following one party for 2 years and they just kind of go around doing like basically one sort of task, whether that is, like you said, getting revenge on a Rakshasa that was like just screwed us over, or whether that is, trying to destabilize a city and implement a more just kind of outcome or something like that. That is always going to be just a very small part of a setting. So I feel like, because like Shade and Rio and both of us too, when we create games or create sort of the thing that we're running within, we are, I guess I can't speak for all of us, but from what I've experienced, we create pretty widely. Like we create a lot of stuff that's happening all the way from like the cosmology of the world all the way down to how a certain city behaves, if that's something that's interesting to us. Rio does a lot of like building ecosystems, and Shade is also very interested in sort of like the history of a world that might be in like a multiversal sort of way, because he also really likes multiverse stuff. But like all of that said, players only experience a very small fraction of that.
Yeah.
So that too, I'm sort of like, how valuable, if you're going to play in like a heroic style of play, how valuable is it to create a setting rather than just like a small area for them to create their story in? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think like, I think that, I don't know, there's a lot of things I'm thinking right now. So I could talk about how I'm building my setting now based on like how I've been sort of like, I don't know if I'm, I don't know, the quote unquote right way. Like I don't know if I'm feeling like I'm doing it the right way, because I feel like I'm just like a little bit concerned that I'm like getting too into it. Right. But in like the super heroic form of play, right? Like I think it could be quite valuable to create all of this like stuff that is relevant. Like if the cosmology is relevant, if the history is very relevant, then it's all like you're sort of talking about one singular storyline. And I think with that mode of play too, it is more common to have more prep between sessions. Whereas in the mode of play that I'm looking at right now when building the setting out, that's like more sandboxy, more like, open table, like not really focusing on a singular linear storyline. I think it is more common to prep a whole setting, which is like a ton of upfront prep. And then in between sessions, it's very little prep, if any. Yeah. And I think with that, like I think for me, it's been very, like I've been trying to not focus too much on all of this stuff. Like cosmology is not really something that's interesting to me as much as like religion is interesting to me. Right. Like I find that much more interesting than I find like the actual truth of what these religions are fighting over. I think the actual fight is more interesting, right? Because that breeds conflict. When it comes to history, like I'm only interested in writing about the history of the locations, like the individual locations, like this mega dungeon, like how did this mega dungeon come to be, and like who wants what, and like based on what, and like why, Yeah. Like insofar as that history is relevant, that's what I'll write. And so like trying to limit my scope to these things is helpful. And so like it's a little bit broader and then more detailed in certain places. But then the bulk of the stuff, right, is all the other stuff, like the gameable content. Yeah. The points of interest and the layers and the dungeons, the factions and their wants and desires and their goals, and then how they achieve those goals and their assets and stuff. And so like that's all like very gameable, right? Or like I also have like a list of like a card draw table of random events, of world events that could happen, that might lead to like a great cataclysm that could be like completely paradigm shifting.
Yeah.
I think it's like kind of setting up things that are gameable rather than things that are just sort of like set dressing, is hopefully what I'm going to be able to accomplish. Hopefully I don't get too in the weeds with like historical stuff, because I don't think I am. I think I'm actually getting too in the weeds with like points of interest and like and like stuff like that. Like what does this monster look like? And then like today I was thinking like, oh, I have to think about like treasures and magic items and stuff that people can find and like where they can find them and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And it kind of reminds me too, one of the things that they were talking about in this sort of video around setting versus story, one of the things that they talked about that Games Workshop does is that when they introduce a new part of the setting or a new item or a new like faction or whatever, they're always like, this has always existed in the galaxy, but like we just like, you know, it was in a different part where it was active. You know what I mean? It was just like in a part of the galaxy where people had not gotten news from for a while, or it was happening out there, but the stories that you had heard up to this point were just in with different factions or groups of people that didn't actually have any of this unit type in stock. And that allows them to create new models and expand out the setting as they go. But it kind of reminds me of like what you're saying, where if you want, like Rio has his world Coronor that he kind of bases all of his setting, like all of his stories in as a setting. Yeah. But I think that like the Games Workshop way of doing that is that you can even have, you know, usually it's high or low fantasy magic essentially, but you could have a steampunk gunslinging aspect of it that's just in a different part of the world or a different, you know, group of people who have figured this out. But it like everything doesn't have to be interconnected in a way that is relevant all the time, if that makes sense, so that you can sort of use a setting by deliberately leaving things blank or leaving things available to change around, which I think is something that DMs don't always want to do, because they want to, you know, sound smart and sound like everything has already been figured out and everything is intentional and a story runs in a specific way. And at the end, everyone claps because like, what a well-crafted experience. But I think that there's also a lot of power when it comes to settings and leaving things obtuse so that the stories can develop in any way, and even could switch if like a new group came in and wanted to play in this world, they could just play in a different part and have it be a completely different experience while it's still unified via this other thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, leaving blanks is really fun. It can be kind of rewarding, and I think it's not necessarily as like daunting as it might seem at first, because like I think, you know, if you're a new DM or you're concerned about like that type of thing, like it might be tempting to just be like, I want to define everything, and you can't define everything, and so like, you know, you might as well define even less than you think you should. You know, a little bit, like, right, like you kind of like, you're like, well, you know, maybe I don't need to know everything exactly about how this, you know, I don't even know. I don't know. Like, I don't know what good candidates are for leaving blanks, but like, I just leave them sometimes.
Yeah. Right. And going back to your stuff around world developments, it kind of is interesting where you can, because the other thing is that like story really is the thing that you have to like kind of keep in mind and keep playing around when you're in an active campaign, because the setting is established at the beginning and then it's sort of, you know, it's what it is. And like you said, you can maybe at the front build in some potential developments that happen, like with your world event deck and all that kind of thing. But I also think that in every game that I've ever played, unless it's like a Red March, it's Red Marsh, right? Well, I said that earlier. West March. my brain fizzled out for a second. But except in the case of a West Marches campaign, most of the time you have one group of people that are playing one party within the setting. And so the setting actually, what you're building is sort of the trappings of a singular story rather than multiple stories, because a lot of people, like you were talking about with the type of play that has been happening and has been popularized in the last like 10 years has been kind of singular. We play through a campaign, we have the big moment at the end, and then we roll new characters and we start and we try something completely different. Maybe it's a different system, all that kind of stuff. So like settings in that way kind of are story, because it's just the beginning stage of a story, rather than in a West Marches campaign where it's like a setting is actually way more important, because people are going to be exploring a lot of weird different parts of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that can be very, I don't know, that it's interesting. Yeah. You can just leave so many things. You can leave some things open, but I think the other thing is having the location be like having everything be like highly localized, right? Like everything within, a couple weeks journey that you have planned out, versus I think in a lot of like more story heavy games, like you can go anywhere, like you can, as long as that's where the story's going, there's all kinds of blanks and stuff. And I remember in the Coronor game, the second one, the Gilded Canaries,
Dark Kingdom,
through Dark Kingdom, we had multiple hex maps, and when Rio pulled those out, I was like, oh shit, there's like 2 more hex maps, and they're just like really big, but they were specific goals in mind, of like what we, it was our choice what order to go in, but it was definitely like there are specific things in mind of what to do, and that was different from what we had been doing previously too. It was like, okay, now we're here, and we're gonna do this part of the campaign, and then it's gonna be done. We're here's the story. We did it.
It reminds me kind of of Strahd in that way, because Strahd does that too, right? Where it has like lots of hooks all over the different parts of the map, but you can kind of never actually interface with some of them.
Yeah, that's true. I think there were probably situations where we didn't have to interact with all of them. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think all the different ways that we've played games before have been really interesting. But our group has never done West Marches. Yeah. I guess you guys kind of did when you guys did Gilded Canaries, when you guys had like rotating DMs, but it wasn't really about the map, right?
No, it was so unimportant where the map was. And one of the things that Rio really hated about that is that when it got back to like the quote unquote main story, right? He felt like he had to reconcile all of the different like things that had happened all over the world, and he was like, okay, well, that wasn't canon, and like that didn't happen the way it did or whatever. But I think that is a great example of maybe where a setting with like narration that is like a little bit, because it also kind of makes me think of like, who is the narrator? Is the narrator the party, and what we're experiencing is 100% truthful, or are we as a group hearing stories about this adventuring party that we just happen to be controlling and moving through, but we're hearing the legend as it's being created? And so some of it,
fun.
Yeah, so like some of it can be an unreliable narrator. Like there can be like the onsen episode that maybe never happened, but people say it happened.
I mean, that's kind of a fun idea. I think like that is sort of like the memory or the recaps, right, that exist out in the world. Or like when you come back to a session and you're like, okay, like who remembers what happened? And then like everybody kind of misremembers something, or we all kind of decide like, I think maybe that didn't quite make sense, so like let's kind of redo that one. Right. Like in our memories, it's like not super consequential, or even things where it's like, can I have remembered to have brought that? Yeah. And it's kind of like, sure. Or like, can I have remembered to like told somebody that we were doing this so that they could come back or whatever, because I just didn't think of it. And I think, I think things like that are really completely acceptable for me personally, even though I don't know if on the podcast I come across as somebody who's like, you have to do everything exactly right every 100% of the time.
The villain, Franco.
Yeah, the villain. I feel like I actually give my players a lot of leeway when it comes to like, oh, I forgot to do this thing or whatever. And so like, as far as like canonical events and stuff like that, it's sort of like shrug. I don't know. It's okay. Like, the other thing that you can do in a West Marches campaign, which I think is kind of cool, which is sort of different than what it sounds like with Gilded Canaries, like the first one that you guys did, that you didn't have a map, that if you do have a map in a West Marches campaign, you can leave corners of the map blank, and then you can just tell, a person who wants to guess DM or whatever, it's like, use that corner of the map, has nothing to do with this, just follow these rules,
Yeah.
and you won't break the canon of the setting.
Yeah.
And I think that can also be quite powerful,
Yeah, and it also makes me think of like what is important in a setting, because in a story it's character, right? The character is the most important part of story, but character actually doesn't really matter in a setting. Setting has like specific like laws, essentially. I guess that's a good way to say it. Like a setting will have laws that it will feel cohesive as long as the laws are followed. I keep using 40K just because it's like an easy one to do because it's fresh in my mind after seeing this. But like the laws of 40K is that the galaxy is constantly at war. There is no peace like basically anywhere. And if there is, it's like a tenuous one. The other rule is that for different factions, there are certain things that are just true. Like the emperor on the golden throne, the golden throne is failing. Like the end of humanity is coming, but you're playing through the last sort of, however many thousands of years before that happens. It will never happen. It's just the law of the setting that is known. You know what I mean? Like
that's always about to happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's like always just a few sessions ahead. And so I think that is like that's kind really of a cool way to think of building a setting of like, if you're setting it in this mega dungeon, maybe there's something like the mega dungeon, like everyone is worried because there's a prophecy that the mega dungeon in the it's unclear when, but in the near future, there is a prophecy that the whatever is in the dungeon is going to come out, and that's why everyone is sending people in. You know what I mean?
I got to tell you that that is something that I have.
Yeah,
cool. But I think it's like I was thinking that made me think of Morkborg.
Yeah, because they have the prophecy line, right?
Yeah, they have the prophecy thing, and obviously, like it comes to pass if you get to that stage where where it actually gets triggered, the apocalypse. But like everything that leads up to that is, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I think like it is interesting to have this sort of like, I don't know, these sets of truths. I guess like I was saying with like the world anchors is like, well, this is always true about this setting, like offering tea, or like I think there's sort of like these like Viking types that I have in the setting, and it's like, oh, you should always fear their scythe more than you fear their axe, meaning like fear them settling in our territory rather than just raiding.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, where it's like all of these sort of like concepts and ideas and like feelings about the setting that people have.
Yeah.
That are sort of like cultural through lines that you can kind of hold on to make it feel more real. And I think that's more like advice about like how a setting can kind of work.
I think though that this is, I kind of want to touch on this for just a little bit longer, because it's something that I find so difficult when you are, and we've talked about it a little bit in the past, of like when you have players who are making their own backstories or whatever, and they come into a game, maybe they don't make their own backstories, but they're like, hey, I'm a paladin. This god that I serve, like, what is the deal with that god? And you know what I mean? And so it's like, it's kind of hard to have the players have the knowledge that they need to interact with the story or the setting in a way that feels 100% authentic if you are too specific. Does that make sense?
Maybe, I guess.
I guess let me try to clarify. So like, let's say you have the god of the dead, and you're
that's a god that you have in the setting, or you as the DM have made this setting, and you've said, hey, this is the pantheon of gods, choose one. I'll send you some of the tenants and you can have a paladin. Let's say it's the god of the dead that they pick. This god is known very much as like a merciful god. It's like a very positive view of death, of like, the shepherd that takes you from one place to another. So it's also the god of travel, and you have all of this stuff that's built up in your setting. And then your player is like, hey, so like, how would I feel about this other thing, this event that's happening if I'm a follower of this god? I feel like settings that you're too specific about create those questions that you then, as the GM, have to say, hey, player, this is how your character would feel, which is always like a weird friction point between the players playing the game and the DM trying to run the game, essentially. You know what I mean? But I think I would never kind of like, I think I would definitely present it as more like, this is what a paladin of the god of the dead would usually like believe or think or whatever.
Yeah.
You're free to think and believe whatever you want. I think that's sort of how you get around with these kind of things where like, the backgrounds that I've created for, cause I'm running like a Karen 2E game, basically like based on that. And there are backgrounds that are sort of like, specific in Karen 2E, and I've made like custom ones that are basically it's everyone has a failed career, and a lot of them I want to say like maybe like I have like 4 of them that are sort of related to one of the major religions in the area, and they're all basically like you're all defectors from this, or like you're formerly like a raider type, like a reaver type, and like you've turned on your band or whatever, you've turned on your clan, like all of these things where you're sort of like you're no longer that thing anymore. So now everything's like open. Like you can do stuff. You still have the skills that you learned when you were that background. You still know how to exorcise demons, and you still know how to fight witches, and you still know how to swing an axe. But you're not beholden to these people. You're not beholden to your companions.
I really like what you just said, and I think I'm going to do it forever. So let me see if I can say why I like it so much. I really love saying, hey, player, this is what the cookie cutter paladin of the god you've chosen does and believes. Like, this is if they are 100% just like a mindless, faithful devotee to a church or whatever. This is the tenets that they would hold. And you are free to do whatever you want. Like, you are free to be sort of like this one-off kind of person who has sort of these beliefs that maybe break the mold a little bit, because that's what we are as adventurers. We're people who break the mold enough that we become famous, we become heroes, whatever.
Totally.
And so I really like the idea of that when building a setting, rather than being like, okay, this is what you might need to know to interact with my story, you say, hey, these are all the things that in the setting people like you believe. That has nothing to do with your character. But if you're ever looking for a reference point on a decision that you want to make, you can say, well, everyone in my, cleric circle believes this. Am I somebody who believes that with them? Or am I somebody who has a more nuanced or different take on this? And that actually allows the players to make more informed choices, which I think is a great way to answer those questions, because they can choose to be like, my character is a little bit of an oddball, believes in the god of death, but views it as a vengeful, wrathful god rather than the peaceful god of transportation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. A heretical view. I think I don't know. I've always been interested in like this like idea of heresies and stuff, of being like counter to like a thing where you're just like, oh, what if the like disagreements about the shape of God. I think it's kind of interesting. Like I was like, oh, like this is like I have in the cosmology, or not the cosmology, but like one of the religion, like the belief is like earth and hell and fairy are all like reflections of heaven, using this like 3-part mirror. And then some heretics believe that the mirror is actually not just 3 parts, it is infinite, or it is this many parts or whatever. And those are like heretical views, and like thinking about like multiversal things and stuff like that.
Yeah, because this is making me feel more and more passionate about setting versus story, I guess. Because like one thing that I really love about that is that it allows your characters to really breathe, or your players to really breathe their interests, their takes, their stuff into it without actually affecting the setting at all. Because like you said, there are heretics that believe there's an infinite amount of mirror or reflections, I should say. That's the multiverse. And and that if you wanted to do that and you say like, okay, you really go in on this, you do like one of the people are one of these heretics, and they're super interested in proving that out, and then you end up being able to do partly a Spelljammer campaign because you're able to like have this guy who's built the ship to explore the multiverse that he thinks is real, but it may or may not be. I think that just like adds so much more joy, because you're adding in more chances for discovery rather than saying this is how things are. And the few moments of discovery are either interpersonally, or it's you discovering what I already know instead of all of us discovering together. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think I've said this a lot, but like as a GM, I also like to be surprised.
Yeah,
I think,
totally.
you know, and I think a random table, like random reaction rolls and random tables and like these different things that are like easy to randomize at the table. I think a lot of things should be sort of randomized ahead of time, but you know, these things can like be surprising for you, and then you can be like, oh, this is great. Like this is, you know, I'm also finding out something new. Like obviously your players hopefully are surprising you too, but you know, I think to maintain like this dispassionate stance that I kind of encourage of being like a neutral arbiter. Like I'm not, you know, I'm not the adversary, I'm the world, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's like, I think being surprised together is always like, it's more fun, and it's definitely easier to prep.
Yeah, totally. And I also think that like, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I've just been thinking about this quite a bit, is this is why I love dice pool systems, because then the players, when you are the world, the players can say, out of these 6 dice that I have in my pool, I want to commit 4 of them to try to discover the solution to this thing, whether it's through a skill check or whether it's through just like a whatever. That to me is the world. It's like, okay, that they're willing to spend like almost all of their resources on this one specific thing. Let's be surprised by how it happens. Let's not just shut it down because the story says that they can't find that yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really cool way to think of it. And I really love the idea too, that it allows people who are maybe in a group that isn't doing a 2-year-long campaign, that instead they're like trading DM spots. Maybe they're doing smaller things where you can say, okay, we're going to, even as a crew, if you wanted to, you could say, we're going to write some rules for the setting.
Yeah.
And all of these can be broken at any time, but the rules are there to give a baseline of what the setting is, and everything that happens is going to be news and discovery that is unreliable narration, essentially. Like it's all canon and it's all not canon. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
Which I think is great.
That's cool, yeah.
Because I love I love unreliable narrator stories. I think that they add more complexity and interest into like otherwise kind of something that's more Western, straightforward way of storytelling. And so being able to do that at a table where you're basically coming up with stuff all together at the time, being able to be like, hey, if we all agree that every story we tell is told through the guise of like an unreliable narrator relaying this in a tavern, we can literally do anything we want with every session.
Yeah, that's true. That's really fun. I think that's also, I think I mentioned earlier, like why I kind of am more interested in religions versus cosmologies.
Yeah.
Because if you have a cosmology, then you are like very definitively saying like, these are the gods that exist and this is what they're doing and this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas with a religion, I can kind of just be like, this is what people think is happening. And then me as the GM, like I don't have to make a decision on that at all. I can say that all of them are true, even if they're contradictory to each other. And that's more interesting.
Because then it becomes a place where if like contradictory beliefs happen and both things happen during the story of your group, then that's a huge mystery of like, well, we're obviously wrong about this. Like there is a Venn diagram happening here, and the truth is in the middle of these two widely believed things, and that's super interesting as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I could see people kind of balking at that as a concept, but I think it's like kind of like, I don't know, you kind of figure it out as you go, and then at some point you decide like, I think this one's true. Yeah. Or like this makes more sense, or like this is more interesting, so I'm going to go with this one.
Or and even like this one's the one that's most relevant, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, like sure, let's go with that one. Like you're following the quest line of this religious faith or whatever for whatever reason at the current moment. And stuff, and then it's like what's the most interesting thing that can happen when they interact with this religion? At the end of it, it's like, oh well, like the god or the sort of the demon they thought they were fighting is the demon they thought they were fighting, or the demon they thought they were fighting is the god of a different religion, or something like that, you know, where it's like it's just like, you know, focusing on that and not needing to answer the questions about everything else. You're just sort of answering the questions about what's relevant at the moment. And I think that's the case for like anything in a sort of more sandboxy style game where you're kind of like, let's just address what's really relevant right now. And so the prep is quite minimal. I think that's usually why that's the case. Because you've defined so much else
Yeah, so much.
It's just little details.
So much more sustainable that way too.
Yeah.
But
I hope
this
so.
actually, this kind of makes me feel like Wizards of the Coast kind of fucked up a little bit by creating all of these different settings rather than just saying, like, let's say Greyhawk, whatever. Greyhawk is the world, but like Eberron is happening somewhere within that Greyhawk world. And like, Strahd is happening somewhere within that Greyhawk world or whatever it is. And so that all of these things.
Well, to be fair, Strahd is happening adjacent to all the worlds.
Yeah, that's because that's more of a module anyway, but that's a really great point. But then that allows you as players to be like, oh, this new book came out. I'm going to like take this new thing for my character as we stumble into this new land where there is all of this stuff happening, but it's still the same story that we've been telling because the setting is massive enough that you can update stuff and give people more things to do without telling them that their game is over. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because it's like the settings are, what was I going to say?
Contradictory.
The settings are like people homebrew settings and they'll just throw everything together. Like every time I've homebrewed something, people will ask me like, what's allowed? And I'm like, I don't know. Ask me. Like, I don't know. Maybe this will be allowed or not. Like, I feel like that's usually where it happens. And I think that's why, like, I find Forgotten Realms like not super interesting because it's very like generic fantasy, which like whatever that means, right? Like it's very much like kitchen sink of fantasy. It's like whatever extra thing is happening here. I don't know. Like it's just like not as interesting to me as something that's like really specific. And I think you get that specificity if you can do it multiple ways, right? But I think because it's such a like this is the default of this game is Forgotten Realms, then like you can say like it's like, okay, go do Eberron over here. But I guess if you have the same world, then you can have like you can split up Forgotten Realms into like sort of discrete parts where like this is happening in here, this is happening here.
And all of it can be denied at any time. Like maybe there's a part of the world that doesn't believe that Eberron actually is a place and it's more of a mythology. But then
that's kind of cool.
But then like an airship crashes and there's like a robot on it, and you're like, what the fuck is this thing? Add those things in.
Yeah, one of the things that I did in my campaign in my Salem game, when one of like the first dungeons that they went into, they get down to the bottom and there's like a black egg.
Yeah.
That's there, and then they open it up and it's a spaceship. And it's like very much like a fantasy world and stuff like that. And I just told them like, listen, you as players, like if you saw this, like in order to help describe things to you, like your characters don't understand this, but you as players would recognize this as like some kind of spaceship.
Yeah.
And so it was basically like, there's like some spaceship shit going on here. Like it's not going to be a big thing, and it never really, we're on hiatus right now, but it's like not. I don't know. It's like kind of like to the side, but I think when you make the setting, I'm just sort of like, what if I had just like a friggin' alien crash land here? I think that'd be fun.
Yeah. And I mean, and like, I'm going to mention it one last time, but like Games Workshop does this all the time where they're like, hey, this front has opened up with the fourth tyrannic war, where they are besieging this like world that is a direct access to the solar system. And so like, if that world falls, Tyranids, these like bioforms are devouring the whole universe, are going to be coming for Earth essentially. But that might never be resolved, or it could be resolved in 20 years. You know what I mean? Like it's like something that is just happening, and it can influence events all the way across the galaxy, because the other side of the galaxy could be like, hey, we got a distress call. We need to bring this artifact back to Terra because it is like an anti-Tyranid weapon and they're dealing with something there. But it could be a completely different enemy type or whatever that you're dealing with in this other crusade that is all about how to deal with the Tyrannic War. And then authors that publish within the setting are able to just be like, this one small world is actually a feral world. And so there are knights on horseback and this like weird thing happens, but it's still part of the setting because this is like, it's such a huge place. And I think that from our conversation and what I heard from this video and everything, it really does feel like the most fun way and the most way that gives you as a GM most the like ability to move laterally is by creating a huge place that might never become relevant, but know that you have the ability to put stuff anywhere you want. And it doesn't matter if the players interact with it because it could be a way for them to contextualize something that has happened or something that adds them, gives them the feeling of like, this place is huge. You know what I mean? Like there's so much stuff happening and we might never even see what happens with the spaceship, but it's cool that it's here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on settings versus story before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's, I think settings are really fun. I think if you're working on your own setting, good luck. I think just make it small, make it tight, you know, make it gameable. I think it's like if your lore is sort of meaningless if the players can't really interact with it in any kind of meaningful way. You know, and I think if you're not doing that and it's fun, then obviously continue doing it because it's world building is just fun. Yeah. But I think when you're getting ready to put something down on the table, like I think it's I don't think people should delude themselves into thinking that like all of it is gameable, right? Like it's sort of like I don't think this is ever going to come up. This was just for me. I don't know. It's fun. Yeah. And that's totally fine. But you know, you got to be aware of that.
Yeah. I'm going to pull back what you said earlier because I think it is incredibly actionable advice for a new setting builder, which is create how the world, like the consensus view of the world, and then be sure to communicate to your players that you don't have to hold these widely held beliefs. Like you can have your own sort of ideas about things, but this is what the world sort of thinks, which I think is also easier because whenever there's like, and we know both of us are not huge fans of skill challenges, but like on a history check or whatever, that allows you to be like, the common parlance says that this specific poison that you're asking about is used in this way and it's used by these people. And it's like, that doesn't have to be true 100% of the time, but that's the commonly held belief or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. Yeah. I think with that too, like if you can also have other groups and other NPCs have like opposing beliefs to those. Yeah. Like commonly held beliefs, right? I think that sort of breeds the conflict. And they can be sort of opposed in ways that your PCs would never approve of, right? Yeah. Like they can be like, it's like, oh, this like morally, it's kind of morally gray thing that the society at large does is like kind of bad. Well, this group opposes that, but in a worse way. Yeah.
Like it could be, it makes for such interesting problems. Like, let's say you have a kingdom. You could say like, okay, this kingdom has designated these like these dukedoms that are part of this greater kingdom on the borderlands. They are the only ones that are able to raise armies as big as they are. And in fact, instead of like a normal taxation structure, they have like an incredibly aggressive and oppressive tithe so that they can keep the monsters at bay. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they are allowed to do this. And it's widely accepted that this is like, you know, this is how it has to be. But then you could have, like you said, a group that's maybe they're considered bandits by the kingdom, but they're just like, it's crazy that one of every family's children has to be tithed to the military to hold the walls. Ooh. Like, that's insane. Yeah. We shouldn't allow that to happen. And that's why we're in opposition to these dukedoms. And then it becomes like, who do you believe morally? Yeah. Do you believe that this is even a choice? Like, it's like really becomes about the players making their own path, because you've just established what the majority and minority kind of thoughts around are.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, everyone. If you want to hear more conversations like this, you should subscribe to Tabletopped wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to talk to us directly, you can do that by going to our podcast website, tabletopppod.com. There's a contact form there. It'll go right to our email. We read every one. If you want to support us financially, you can go to the Patreon, patreon.com/tabletopped. That is where we also drop some stuff from time to time. That's just little extras for people who like us there. And we will see you in 2 weeks. All right. Goodbye.
Goodbye.